This seat is not for someone like you. 5 words, spoken quietly, almost gently. And yet every person in that glittering ballroom heard them. Dr. Selena Vaughn did not shout. She did not need to. She simply placed one perfectly manicured hand on the back of the reserved chair, smiled the way a person smiles when they already know they've won, and looked at Dr. Zariah Brooks as though she were a mistake someone had forgotten to correct. The room went still. Zariah stood there, in her burgundy gown, stethoscope calluses on her hands, 12 years of saving lives behind her eyes, and felt every single stare land on her skin like something cold. If that were you standing there, what would you do? If you've ever been dismissed by someone who never once looked at what you were capable of, this story is going to stay with you. Subscribe to this channel right now. Not because we're asking, but because what happens next in that ballroom will change the way you think about power, dignity, and the kind of respect money cannot manufacture. Hit that like button, drop your city and country in the comments. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. And stay with us. Because the best part? It hasn't even started yet. PA. The charity gala for Mercy General Hospital happened every year in the 3rd week of October, and every year Zariah Brooks told herself she wasn't going to attend. The invitations were technically mandatory for senior surgeons. Encouraged attendance was how HR phrased it in the memo, but everyone understood what that meant. You showed up in something expensive, you smiled at donors you'd never met, you shook hands with board members who couldn't name a single procedure you'd performed, and then you ate rubber chicken at a table near the back and counted the minutes until you could leave. Zariah had been doing it for 6 years. She knew where she stood at these events. Not in the hierarchy. On paper, she was one of the most decorated cardiac surgeons the hospital had ever employed. But in a room full of people who judged the packaging before they read a single word inside, she had always understood that her competence was something people had to be convinced of. It didn't walk in the door ahead of her. It waited outside in the cold, while everyone formed their first impressions. This year, she almost didn't go. Her assistant, Tomas, had called at 4 in the afternoon to ask if she needed a car arranged, and she'd been standing in her bathroom in her robe, staring at the burgundy dress hanging on the back of the door, seriously considering telling him to cancel. "Dr. Brooks?" Tomas had said. "Should I?" "No," she said. "I'll be there." She didn't know why she said it. Something stubborn in her chest refused to let her stay home, because that was the thing about people like Zariah. They showed up. They always showed up. Even when showing up meant walking into a room that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted them there. She arrived at the Grand Meridian Hotel at 7:15. The venue was exactly as overwhelming as it always was. Crystal chandeliers, men in black ties, women in jewelry that probably cost more than Zariah's first car. A string quartet played near the fountain. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. Zariah took a glass she didn't intend to drink and found her name card at a table near the center of the room. Not the back this year, which surprised her. Someone must have rearranged the seating, or maybe her recent work had finally moved the needle on where administration thought she belonged. She was walking toward her table when she saw it, the chair next to the head table, the one with the small silver placeholder that read reserved. One of only 3 such placeholders in the entire ballroom, positioned specifically beside the cluster of seats where the hospital's largest donors sat alongside the board chairman and the chief of medicine. And Selena Vaughn was standing right next to it, talking to a man Zariah didn't recognize, laughing at something he said, one hand resting proprietarily on the back of that chair. Zariah's table was 2 down from there. She wasn't anywhere near the reserved seat. She wasn't reaching for it. She wasn't even looking at it particularly. But Selena looked up, saw her, and something shifted in her expression. "Zariah." She said it pleasantly, the way you say something when pleasantness is a weapon. "I wasn't sure you were coming this year." "I come every year," Zariah said. "Of course you do." Selena smiled. She was wearing a deep green gown that looked like it had been tailored specifically for the occasion, which it probably had. Selena Vaughn was the kind of surgeon who planned 6 months ahead for events like this. "Are you seated nearby?" Zariah gestured toward her table without much interest. She had no intention of making this a conversation. "Ah," Selena said. That's lovely. A pause, just long enough. You know the reserved seats are for the Donor Relations Committee and their guests, right? I just want to make sure no one accidentally... She glanced at Zoraya's table card in her hand, then at the reserved chair, as if connecting dots that weren't there. Well, you know how it can be confusing. Zoraya looked at her evenly. I'm not confused about where I'm sitting, Selena. Of course not. That smile again. I'm just saying, some people see reserved and think it doesn't apply to them. It does, always does. She tilted her head and her voice dropped just slightly, not enough to be private, exactly, but enough to seem like it. This seat is not for someone like you, Zoraya. I mean that respectfully. The noise in the room continued. The quartet played. People laughed somewhere behind them. And yet the small cluster of people nearest to them, 4, 5, 6 people, had gone briefly quiet in the way people go quiet when they sense something sharp in the air. Zoraya did not move. She was good at not moving when she wanted to. 12 years in operating rooms will do that. You learn to hold very still when everything inside you is screaming, because the screaming doesn't help. Control helps. Precision helps. Respectfully, Zoraya repeated quietly. Of course. Selena's chin lifted slightly. I just think it's important that everyone understands where things stand, don't you? And that was when the room changed. Zoraya didn't notice it immediately. She was still looking at Selena, running through the 37 things she could say in response, none of which felt adequate, all of which would cost her something. Her professionalism, her composure, her carefully maintained reputation for never letting them see her crack. She heard it before she understood it. The particular quality of silence that falls over a room, not when something quiet happens, but when something commanding happens. The way sound doesn't stop so much as it gets absorbed. She turned. A man had risen from the head table. He was tall, not the tallest in the room, but the kind of tall that comes with a particular stillness, so that his height seemed more than it was. Dark suit, no tie. A face that was handsome the way certain dangerous things are handsome. With economy. With nothing unnecessary about it. His hair was dark, swept back, and his eyes, even from 10 feet away, had a quality that Zoraya would later struggle to describe to anyone. Not cold, not warm. Something in between that had nothing to do with temperature. He walked across the ballroom. Not quickly, not slowly. He walked like a man who has never in his life been anywhere he wasn't supposed to be. He walked directly to Zoraya. Not to Selena, not to the board chairman, not to the Donor Relations Committee. To Zoraya Brooks, who was standing with a champagne glass she hadn't touched, and the remnants of something ugly still sitting in her chest. He stopped in front of her. He offered his hand, not a handshake. His hand, palm up, the way you offer your arm to someone you're escorting. Doctor, he said. His voice was quiet, measured, a slight accent that she couldn't immediately place. Please sit with me. Zoraya looked at his hand. She had been in rooms her whole life where the wrong choice could cost her everything. She had learned early that the decision to trust someone was always a calculated risk, and that calculation had served her well, mostly by making her careful, occasionally by making her lonely. She looked at the hand, then up at his face. He wasn't performing for the room. That was the thing she noticed first. Every other gesture of chivalry she'd ever received in a public setting had carried some awareness of the audience, some angle. This man looked only at her, as if no one else in the room existed, and the opinion of no one else in the room concerned him. She took his hand. He led her across the ballroom to the head table, pulled out the chair beside him, and waited until she sat before taking his own seat. The entire room watched. No one spoke. Selena Vaughn stood exactly where she'd been standing, and she didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Her expression had gone through several things very quickly. Surprise, then confusion, then something hot and difficult to name. Zoraya sat at the head table, back straight, hands folded in her lap, and she focused on breathing evenly. In, out, slow. The man beside her picked up his water glass. Damien Valenti, he said, still without looking at anyone but her. She had heard that name before. Most people in this city had. It existed at the edge of conversations that people started carefully and finished quietly, associated with things that no one confirmed and everyone suspected. He was the kind of person you read about in the paper in the third paragraph of an article about something else entirely, his name appearing and then disappearing before you quite knew what to do with it. She had not known he was on the hospital's donor list. She made a note of that. "Zariah Brooks," she said. "I know who you are," he said. Simple, matter of fact. She waited for more. He didn't offer more. Around them, the room was slowly recovering its noise, the way a flock of birds rearranges itself after something passes through. People resumed conversations, picked up glasses, turned to their neighbors. But Zariah could feel the eyes that remained, could feel Selena's in particular, across the room, like a heat source. "You didn't have to do that," Zariah said. Damien Valenti turned to look at her. Properly looked, the way few people had bothered to look at her in this room ever. "No," he agreed. "I didn't." "So why did you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because someone should have, a long time ago." Zariah didn't know what to do with that. She spent a few seconds deciding not to think about what it meant. There was dinner to get through. There was a room full of people watching her from the corners of their eyes. There was the very practical matter of the fact that she was sitting next to a man who reportedly ran a significant portion of the city's underground economy at a hospital gala in her burgundy dress. She reached for her water glass. "I'm going to need you to not do anything else surprising tonight," she said. He considered this with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I'll try." He didn't succeed. Over the next 2 hours, Zariah discovered several things about Damien Valenti that didn't match the name she'd heard in newspaper third paragraphs. He knew, in surprising detail, the difference between a coronary bypass and a valve replacement. He asked questions that weren't the questions people asked to seem interested. They were the questions of someone who actually wanted to know the answer. He had read, genuinely read, about the clinical trial she'd submitted preliminary data for 6 months ago, data that had not been published in any mainstream publication, only in a specialty cardiology journal that very few people outside the field would encounter. She frowned at him over her water glass. "How do you know about the trial?" "I read," he said. "You read cardiology journals." "I read everything that concerns people I care about." The way he said it was so quiet, so completely without performance, that it took her a full 3 seconds to process the implication. When she did, she set her glass down. "Your mother," she said. He looked at her steadily. "My mother. Elena Valenti, room 412. 3 months ago, a Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m., when Zariah had been called in on her evening off for what had been described over the phone as a difficult case. That was hospital administrator language for, we don't know what we're dealing with, and we need our best people. What they were dealing with had been a 63-year-old woman whose heart had decided, without much warning and without any patience for negotiation, to begin failing in a way that 3 other surgeons had looked at and quietly suggested was beyond repair. Not their exact words. Surgeons rarely said things that directly. But the implication had been clear in the room, in the particular quality of the silence between suggestions. Zariah had stood at the foot of that bed and looked at the charts and the scans and the woman in the bed, who had dark eyes that were watching her with the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent too many hours in a room where people talked about them, but not to them. "Tell me what's happening," Elena Valenti had said. To Zariah, not to the other physicians. To her. Zariah had told her, plainly, without dressing it up or stripping it down. She'd explained what was failing and what options existed and which of those options she believed in and why. Elena had listened without interrupting. Then she'd said, "Can you fix it?" "I believe I can," Zariah had said. Not, "We'll try our best." Not, "I'll do everything I can." She had said what she believed because the woman in the bed was asking for her actual opinion, not for a liability-proof response. "Then fix it," Elena had said. It had taken 4 hours and 40 minutes. 2 of those minutes had been ones Zariah would carry with her for a long time. A moment during the procedure when everything that was supposed to hold had decided not to hold, when the room had briefly felt like a held breath, when every bit of her training had compressed into a very small and specific point. She had not walked away from that point. She had moved through it. Elena Valenti had spent 12 days in recovery and been discharged walking, talking, and according to the nursing staff, arguing cheerfully with anyone who tried to limit her visiting hours. Zoraya had not met a family member during that time. She knew there was a son. She had not been told his name. She looked at the man sitting beside her now and understood, with a kind of slow-rolling clarity, exactly why no one in this ballroom had moved when he crossed the room toward her, why the board chairman had straightened in his chair, why even the string quartet had seemed to miss half a beat. "You were in the hospital," she said, "while she was in recovery." "Every day," he said. "I never saw you." "I know." His jaw shifted slightly. "I was careful about that." "Why?" He turned his water glass in his hand. "Because I didn't want anyone treating my mother differently because of who I am." Zoraya absorbed that, set it alongside everything else she'd learned about him in the last 2 hours. Let it sit. "I should thank you," he said. "I tried to afterward. The hospital told me you'd declined to receive any messages from my family. I don't accept personal contact from patients' families." "I know." There was something in his voice then, not quite humor, not quite respect, something that partook of both. "I was told that too. I was told exactly that, and I was told it without any apology by a woman at the front desk who looked like she was considering whether she needed to call security." Zoraya almost smiled. "That was Linda." "Linda," he agreed. "I have not forgotten Linda. She's good at her job." "She is exceptional at her job," he said. "And she made it clear that my relationship to any amount of money was not going to change the hospital's policies where you were concerned, which I respected." He paused. "Which I respected more than I've respected most things in recent memory." Zoraya looked at him, then away. The dinner plates were being cleared around them. Across the room, she could see Selena Vaughn at a table near the far wall, talking to someone with the too bright focus of a person pretending to have a good time. "You didn't cross the room tonight to thank me," Zoraya said. "No," he said. "Then what did you do it for?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because you saved something that I cannot replace," he said. "And the woman I watched get dismissed in front of a room full of people, that same woman, deserves to sit wherever she wants to sit." The words landed in Zoraya's chest in a complicated way. Not the way flattery landed, not soft and sweet and easy. They landed like something heavier than that, something that had traveled a long way and arrived a little roughed up from the journey. She did not say thank you. She couldn't quite get there, not yet. What she said was, "The surgery wasn't about what your mother deserves. I would have operated the same way on anyone in that room." "I know that," he said. "That's the whole point." The ballroom was shifting around them. The after-dinner program beginning, someone moving to the podium, the lights adjusting slightly overhead. The string quartet had stopped playing and the room was pulling its attention toward the front. Damien Valenti leaned back in his chair and looked toward the podium with the expression of a man who had arranged himself in public spaces for long enough to know how to do it without thinking. Zoraya sat beside him. She thought about the chair she'd been standing next to when he rose from this table, about the 5 words that had preceded everything, about the way those words had felt, landing exactly as they were intended to land, in a room full of witnesses, none of whom would have said a thing. She thought about the fact that she had walked into this building tonight seriously considering going home, and that whatever had made her say "I'll be there" to Tomas on the phone had brought her here, to this seat, next to this particular stranger. The program director was speaking into the microphone at the front of the room, saying something about the year's charitable contributions, and Zoraya was not listening to a single word. She was thinking about a woman in a hospital bed with dark, tired eyes who had looked at her and asked, "Can you fix it?" And she was thinking about the fact that the woman's son had apparently been sitting in this hospital every single day for 12 days, making sure no one knew who he was so that his presence wouldn't change the way his mother was treated. She was thinking about what that kind of love looked like: quiet, careful, entirely without performance. Outside, the October night pressed against the tall hotel windows, and the city moved around them the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, full of stories happening in all directions at once. Stories that began in one place and ended somewhere no one had planned on. Zoraya reached for her champagne glass. For the first time that evening, she drank from it. The gala ended at 10:43. Zoraya knew the exact time because she'd checked her watch under the table twice during the final remarks. Not out of boredom, but out of the particular alertness that had settled over her during the last hour of the evening. That state she recognized from long surgeries, when the hard part was over but the body hadn't received the message yet, and kept insisting on staying ready. She said goodnight to Damien Valenti near the coat check. It was a brief exchange. He handed her his card, a plain white card with a phone number and nothing else. No name, no title. And she took it the way she took most things that came at her unexpectedly, without comment, with both eyes open. "In case you need anything," he said. She almost said, "I don't need anything." She stopped herself, not because it was untrue, but because it would have been rude, and she had not yet figured out how to be rude to this man without it feeling like it cost something. "Drive safe," she said instead. He nodded. No smile, no performance. He just turned and walked toward the exit, and the small constellation of men who had been positioned at various points around the room, men she'd noticed but not commented on, men who stood with the particular stillness of people who have been trained to watch, fell into formation behind him with the quiet efficiency of water finding a drain. Zoraya stood at the coat check and watched the door close after them. Then she went home and did not sleep. She lay in her bed in her apartment on the 14th floor with the city humming below her windows and stared at the ceiling and thought about none of the things a person would expect her to think about after an evening like that. She did not think about Damien Valenti's face or his voice or the way he had offered his hand. She thought about Selena Vaughn's face when he did it, the particular sequence of expressions, the surprise, then the recalibration, then the thing underneath that was harder to name. She had seen that look before, not on Selena, on other people, in other rooms. It was the look that preceded a decision, not the decision itself. The moment before, when a person who has already decided they want something becomes certain that someone is in their way. Zoraya had been in enough difficult rooms to know the difference between someone who was embarrassed and someone who was planning. She thought about that look for a long time. At 2 a.m, she got up, drank a glass of water, and went back to bed. She slept badly. She was at the hospital by 6:15. The first thing she noticed was how people looked at her. It wasn't obvious. Zoraya had long experience with the non-obvious version. The way people's eyes snagged on her for half a second too long. The way conversations thinned when she walked into a break room. The way certain colleagues smiled at her with all the warmth of someone performing warmth for an audience. She had learned to log these things without reacting to them, the way you log weather. It was information. It was not a wound, unless she let it be. But the looks this Monday morning were different from the usual. They had the quality of something recent, like people had received new information and were still deciding what to do with it. She was passing the nurses' station outside cardiology when she caught it. 2 residents, heads bent together, who straightened when they saw her coming. Both smiled too quickly. One of them said, "Good morning, Dr. Brooks," with the brightness of someone covering over a word they hadn't finished. She kept walking. In her office, she found her schedule for the day. 3 consultations, a follow-up, and an early afternoon surgery that she'd been preparing for all week. She sat down, opened her email, and found 47 messages waiting. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that the third one, from an address she didn't immediately recognize, had a subject line that read, "Interesting evening you had." She opened it. It was 4 lines. No signature. The line said in plain, unadorned text that a photograph had been taken at the gala the night before. That the photograph showed her seated beside a man described in the email as a known organized crime figure. That the email's author was concerned about what this implied regarding her professional judgment. That they were sharing this concern with others who might be similarly interested. Zoraya read it twice. Then she closed it, picked up her coffee, and walked down to the locker room to change into her scrubs. She did not tell anyone about the email. Not yet. She thought about it while she changed, examining it from different angles the way she examined a scan, looking for what it told her, and more importantly, what it was trying not to tell her, It had the shape of a threat that hadn't decided yet whether to commit to being a threat. An opening move. She finished the first consultation, the follow-up. She was halfway through her second consultation when her pager went off. Not the surgery, not a patient emergency, but an internal page from Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief of medicine, requesting her presence in his office at noon. She finished the consultation. She went to the office. Marcus Webb was 61 years old and had run this hospital's medical department for 9 years, with the combination of genuine competence and political instinct that the job required. He was not, in Zoraya's experience, a man who called people to his office to deliver good news at noon on a Monday. He was standing at his window when she came in. He turned around when she closed the door. "Sit down, Zoraya." "I'll stand." He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down himself, behind his desk, which was the kind of heavy dark wood desk that was designed to communicate that the person behind it made decisions. "I'm going to assume you saw the coverage," he said. "What coverage?" He turned his laptop around on the desk to face her. There was an open browser tab, a social media post, one of the city's gossip accounts, the kind with 140,000 followers who consumed physician drama with the same appetite they brought to everything else. The post had a photograph. The photograph was of her and Damien Valenti at the head table, taken from across the room, slightly angled, the kind of shot that wasn't staged but had the specific framing of someone who knew what they were doing. In it, Zoraya was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and the composition, she had to admit this, had a quality that made it look like more than it was, more intimate, more decided. The caption read, "Mercy General's star surgeon getting cozy with someone who should probably be on the other side of a hospital visit. Who approved this guest list?" Followed by a string of tag suggestions. Zoraya looked at it for 4 seconds. "This is a gossip account," she said. "It has 140,000 followers, and 3 local news outlets have already picked up the story." "There is no story." "Zoraya, Marcus," she kept her voice even. "I attended the hospital gala. I sat where I was invited to sit by another guest. That is not a story." "The guest is Damien Valenti." "I'm aware." "Do you understand who—" "I understand who he is." She set her hands on the back of the chair she hadn't sat in. "His mother was my patient. He's a donor. He was at the gala as a hospital guest. I don't choose my dinner companions based on their Wikipedia page." Marcus rubbed the side of his face. He had the look of a man who had been fielding phone calls since before she arrived. "I've already received 2 calls from board members." "About a dinner photograph." "About your public association with—" "Marcus." Her voice was quiet, final. "If you're about to tell me that I need to justify sitting in a chair to which I was personally invited, in a room full of hospital leadership, by a man who was there as an invited guest of this institution, I need you to think very carefully about what you're saying before you finish that sentence." He stopped. The room was quiet for a moment. "I'm not telling you that," he said finally. "I'm telling you that people are watching and that you need to be careful." "I'm always careful," she said. "Careful doesn't seem to stop people from finding things to say." She left his office. In the hallway, she stood for a moment with her back to the wall and breathed. Just breathed. In and out, slow, the way she did before a complicated surgery when her hands needed to be absolutely still. She had known something was coming. She had seen it in Selena's face the night before. She just hadn't known what shape it would take, or how quickly. Selena Vaughn arrived at the hospital at 8 that morning, which was normal. What was not normal was that she went directly to her office, closed the door, and did not emerge for 40 minutes. The nursing staff noticed this because Selena was not typically a door closer. She was the opposite, a person who moved through space as if it were a stage, whose visibility was a deliberate part of her professional identity. When she did come out, she went to the cardiology records department. The records department was staffed, on Monday mornings, by a clerk named Patrick Osei, who had worked at Mercy General for 3 years and was widely regarded as efficient, quiet, and thoroughly forgettable. He was the kind of person who became invisible in institutions, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had long ago discovered that invisibility had its advantages. Selena had discovered Patrick about 4 months ago, not his professional skills, his financial situation, which she had learned about through the particular attentiveness she applied to people who might be useful to her. He had a mother in a care facility whose costs exceeded his salary by an uncomfortable margin. He had credit card debt. He had the specific look of someone being slowly worn down by arithmetic. She had not offered him money directly. She had approached it sideways, the way Selena approached most things, with an angle, with layers, with the careful maintenance of deniability. She had mentioned, in the context of an entirely different conversation, that she had connections to a healthcare staffing agency that paid significantly better than hospital work. She had mentioned it once and then not mentioned it again, and she had watched Patrick absorb the implication and begin very gradually to lean in her direction. That morning, after 40 minutes in her office, she stopped at his desk. "Patrick," she said, friendly, unhurried. "Could you pull the access logs for cardiology records over the last 6 months? I'm doing a routine review for the Quality Assurance Committee." Patrick looked up. He had learned not to ask her too many questions. "Of course, Dr. Vaughn," he said. She smiled at him. It was a warm smile, the kind she was very good at. "Take your time. I'll check back with you this afternoon." She walked away. What she was looking for was not in those logs. She already knew that. What she was doing was establishing a pattern of access, a paper trail she was building not toward truth but away from it, one careful step at a time. Zariah's afternoon surgery was a triple bypass on a 58-year-old man named Gerald Fitch, who had 3 grandchildren and a border collie named Hank, and who had squeezed Zariah's hand before the anesthetic took hold and said, "You better be as good as they say you are, Doc." "Better," she'd said. It was a statement, not a boast. It was her understanding of the facts. The surgery took 3 hours and 20 minutes. Gerald Fitch's heart, which had been in serious trouble, was not in serious trouble when she finished. She changed out of her surgical gear, washed her hands, and stood in the scrub room for a moment with the particular emptiness that good surgeries left. Not a bad emptiness, more like the feeling of a weight set down cleanly. She was walking toward her office when she ran into Selena in the corridor outside the cardiac wing. Not accidentally. Zariah recognized the non-accidental quality of it immediately. Selena standing at a junction, looking at her phone, positioned where she could not be missed. "Zariah!" She looked up as if surprised. "Good surgery?" "Fine," Zariah said, and kept walking. "I heard you had a meeting with Marcus Webb." Zariah stopped, turned around slowly. Selena's face was arranged in a pattern of neutral curiosity that was so precisely neutral it was its own kind of tell. "What did you hear?" Zariah said. "Just that there was a meeting." Selena shrugged lightly. "It happens to all of us. Administration always wants to talk after events like last night. It's normal." "It is normal," Zariah agreed. "Is there something you need, Selena?" "No." A small pause. "I just wanted to check on you. Last night was fine." "Strange. Sitting with someone like that, I imagine it put you in an uncomfortable position." Zariah looked at her. She thought about the email. She thought about the timing of the photograph and the gossip account post and Marcus Webb's phone calls and Selena standing at this exact junction at this exact moment. She thought about what she'd seen in Selena's face the night before, the moment before the decision. "Selena," she said, keeping her voice completely level, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'd think very carefully about it before you do any more of it." Selena's expression didn't change. That was the impressive part. She was genuinely good at this. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." A beat. Something moved behind Selena's eyes, not guilt, more like calibration. "I'm just concerned about you," Selena said. "That's all." Zariah turned and walked away. She made it to her office, closed the door, sat down, and for 30 seconds allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. The exhaustion, the anger, the calculation of what came next. Then she opened her laptop and wrote a detailed email to herself, time-stamped, outlining every interaction she'd had that day and the night before. Every exchange, every meeting, every look. She had learned a long time ago that documentation was armor. The next 3 weeks were a slow accumulation. It did not feel slow from the inside. From the inside, it felt like being in the middle of a tide that was too gradual to fight, but too powerful to outrun. Small things, separately meaningless. Together, building towards something. A patient consultation note that Zoraya had dictated on a Wednesday afternoon appeared in the system on Thursday morning with 2 additional lines she had not dictated. Lines suggesting that she had recommended a specific post-operative medication regimen that she had explicitly not recommended because she had concerns about that medication's interaction with the patient's existing prescriptions. The addition was subtle, professional sounding. Exactly the kind of thing a tired resident might overlook. Zoraya caught it. She flagged it to the records department and had it corrected, and she added the incident to the email she kept writing to herself. 2 weeks later, a billing record associated with one of her post-operative follow-up patients showed a charge for a service Zoraya had not provided. When she requested clarification from billing, she was told the charge had been entered by the attending physician, which was her. She had not entered it. She could not prove she had not entered it because it was in the system under her credentials. She escalated it. Billing apologized. The charge was removed. She kept writing to herself. The 4th week, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. The voice on the other end was male, with the careful flatness of someone reading from something prepared. It said that it had come to certain people's attention that she had an ongoing relationship with a member of organized crime, that this ongoing relationship included financial considerations, that evidence of this existed and was being reviewed. Zoraya said, "Who is this?" The call ended. She sat in her car in the hospital parking garage for 6 minutes. Just sat. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere below her a car alarm went off briefly and then stopped, and she sat with her hands on the steering wheel and felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Fear. Not the professional kind, not the clinical kind that kept her sharp in an operating room. The other kind. The kind that lived in the body before the mind caught up with it. The kind that tasted like copper and felt like the floor dropping out. She breathed through it. She had done this before, so found the thing under the fear, which was usually just the truth of her situation stripped of comfort. The truth here was that someone was constructing something, had been constructing it for weeks. The consultation note, the billing record, now a phone call implying financial entanglement. She took out her phone. She looked at the plain white card she had moved from her evening bag to her wallet 12 days ago without quite deciding why. She put the phone down. She was not going to make that call. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Because she understood, in the marrow of her, that the moment she involved Damien Valenti in whatever this was, she handed Selena Vaughn exactly the narrative she was building. A black woman doctor, entangled with a crime figure, calling on his power when things got difficult. It was too clean. It was exactly the story someone was trying to tell, and Zoraya was not going to hand-deliver the ending. She drove home. She called her lawyer instead, a woman named Diane Ashworth, who had known Zoraya since their undergraduate days and who had subsequently become one of the most precise legal minds Zoraya had ever encountered. She told her everything, the email, the record additions, the billing discrepancy, the phone call. Diane was quiet for a moment when she finished. "You've been keeping records," Diane said, "since the gala." "Good." A pause. "Don't talk to anyone at the hospital about this. Don't ask questions that make you look like you're looking for something. Just keep doing your job and keep documenting everything." "What do you think they're building?" Diane took a careful breath. "I think someone is trying to create a pattern that looks like you've been compromised, professionally, financially, probably by association with Valenti. Can they make that stick?" "It depends on how much they have and how much patience the hospital has." Diane's voice was steady, the kind of steady that meant she was being more honest than kind. "Zoraya, if they get to the point of filing a formal complaint with the medical board, I know what that means." "Do you have any idea who's doing this?" Zoraya looked at the ceiling of her bedroom. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent, and she lay in her bed for the 2nd time in a month, unable to sleep, running calculations. "Yes," she said. "Can you prove it?" A long pause. "Not yet," she said. The morning the formal complaint was filed, Zoraya was in surgery. She didn't know about it until she came out. She was still in her surgical scrubs, mask pulled down around her chin, hands in the process of being dried on a towel, when Linda from the front desk, steady, capable Linda, who had held off Damien Valenti himself and never once apologized for it, appeared in the scrub room doorway with an expression on her face that Zariah had never seen there before. "Dr. Brooks," Linda said, "there are people here to see you." The people were two members of hospital administration and a woman Zariah didn't recognize who introduced herself as a representative of the State Medical Board's compliance office. They were waiting in a conference room on the 4th floor. Zariah dried her hands completely. She took off her surgical cap. She walked down the hallway and into the elevator and pressed the button for the 4th floor and watched the doors close. In the conference room, she sat down across from 3 people who had folders in front of them. The compliance officer opened her folder first. "Dr. Brooks," she said, "we're here regarding a formal complaint that has been filed alleging professional misconduct and potential financial impropriety. Specifically," she turned a page, "the allegation is that you altered patient records on at least 2 separate occasions to conceal a financial arrangement between yourself and an outside party." Zariah said nothing. "Additionally, there is an allegation that controlled medical information was shared outside the hospital's protected systems with an individual under ongoing federal surveillance." The room was very still. "The complaint," the compliance officer continued, "has been filed by a colleague. It includes documentation, electronic access logs, billing records, and a sworn statement that the investigation committee will review." Zariah looked at the table in front of her. She looked at the folder. She thought about the consultation note with the 2 added lines, the billing record, the phone call, all of it clicking into position now with the precision of something that had been assembled carefully over time. "Am I suspended?" she said. The administrator on the left, a man named Howell, who had never quite met her eyes in 6 years of professional acquaintance, cleared his throat. "Pending the investigation," he said, "your hospital privileges will be—" "Yes or no, Howell?" He looked at the table. "Yes." Zariah sat with that for 3 seconds. Then she stood up, pushed her chair in carefully, and said, "I'll need a copy of everything in that folder." She walked to the door. "Dr. Brooks," the compliance officer, "your badge—" Zariah unclipped it from her scrub top. She set it on the table without turning around. And then she walked out of the conference room, down the hallway, past the nurses' station where 2 people stopped what they were doing to watch her go, into the elevator, down to the lobby, and out through the front doors of the hospital where she had spent 12 years of her life. The October air hit her face. She stood on the front steps for a moment, badgeless, in her scrubs, while the city moved around her. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed this with something like grim satisfaction. 12 years of operating rooms. The hands always knew how to stay still. She took out her phone. She did not call the white card. She called Diane. "It happened," she said when Diane answered, a breath on the other end. Then, "Where are you?" "Outside the hospital." "Go home. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in an hour." Zariah looked back at the building, the glass doors, the lobby she could see through them, the nurses' station, the hallway she had walked 1,000 times carrying the weight of other people's survival. She turned around. She walked to her car. She was almost to the parking garage when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering. She answered. Silence for a second. Then, "I heard." His voice, quiet even. She stopped walking. "How?" "I hear most things." A pause. "Are you all right?" She thought about saying yes. It would have been easier. It would have ended the conversation. "No," she said instead, because the word came out before she could stop it, and she was too tired in that moment, standing in a hospital parking garage in her scrubs, having just surrendered her badge, to replace it with something more controlled. The silence on the other end was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of someone listening. "Zariah." His voice was different now, not softer, more direct. The way he spoke when he had decided to say something true. "I want to help." "I know you do." Then, "Not like that," she said. "Whatever you're thinking, not like that. I need this to be clean." Another pause. longer. All right, he said. That's it? All right. You told me what you need, he said. I'm not going to argue with that. She leaned against the concrete pillar nearest her and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Someone built this, she said. Carefully, over weeks. There are fake records, and there's a billing entry I didn't make, and there are logs that probably don't look the way I need them to look. I know, he said. She opened her eyes. What do you know? Enough to know that what they built, someone else can unbuild. His voice was steady, certain, the way it was certain about everything. Not from arrogance, but from experience. But not in a way that leaves marks, not in a way that gives anyone else ammunition. She was quiet. I won't do anything without your agreement, he said. But I need you to let me look. That's all. Just look. She stood in the parking garage with her phone against her ear and her badge sitting on a conference table on the 4th floor of the building behind her, and she thought about 12 years of sacrifice and a compliance officer's folder and Selena Vaughn's face in a ballroom and what it cost to say yes and what it cost to say no. Look, she said finally. Just look. And Damien, yes. If you find anything, you bring it to me first. You don't move on it without me. A beat. Agreed, he said. She hung up. She got in her car. She sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, the engine not yet started. She was not someone who asked for help. Had never been, really. Had learned early that asking for help in rooms that had already decided not to see you was a form of weakness they would use. She had built herself into a woman who did not need it, or if she needed it in the kind of controlled, documented, professionally appropriate way that could not be twisted into something else. But the folder on that conference table had her name on it, and the records that Selena had spent weeks building were in a system she could not access anymore. And the truth, the actual truth, plain and unglamorous, was that she had been fighting with one hand tied behind her back since the moment she set foot in this city, in this hospital, in this profession, and she was tired. Not broken. Just tired. The kind of tired that didn't come from one bad day, but from every day before it, stacked up like weight. She started the engine. She drove home. And somewhere in the city behind her, in the particular kind of quiet that preceded something irreversible, Selena Vaughn sat in her office with her door closed and her phone face down on her desk, and she thought she had won. She did not yet know what she had started. Diane Ashworth arrived at Zoraya's apartment at 6:47 in the evening, carrying a leather briefcase, a container of soup from the Vietnamese place 3 blocks over that she knew Zoraya hadn't eaten from in weeks, and the specific expression of someone who had been doing math in their head for the last hour and didn't love the answers. She set the soup on the kitchen counter without comment. She opened her briefcase on the dining table. She laid out a legal pad, 2 pens, and a folder of her own. Tell me everything again, she said. From the beginning, not the summary, everything. Zoraya told her. She had changed out of her scrubs and was wearing sweatpants and a gray long-sleeve shirt that had a small bleach stain near the left cuff from a cleaning accident 3 years ago that she'd never gotten around to throwing away. She sat at the table across from Diane and told her everything in the order it happened, slowly, with the methodical precision she used when briefing a surgical team. Nothing editorialized, nothing softened. Diane wrote. She wrote fast, with the shorthand she'd developed in law school and never bothered to update because it still worked. She asked 3 clarifying questions. She did not interrupt otherwise. When Zoraya finished, Diane set her pen down and looked at the legal pad. The billing record, she said. You said it was entered under your credentials. Yes. Who has access to your login credentials besides you? No one should. Who could get access? Zoraya was quiet for a moment. Record staff, IT, anyone with administrative clearance. Who in records do you interact with regularly? Patrick Osei, mostly. Diane wrote the name. What's your read on him? Competent, quiet. Zoraya paused. He's been, I don't know. Something's been off with him the last month or so. I thought he was having a hard time personally. Diane looked up from the pad. Or, she said carefully, someone was having a hard time with him. The sentence sat between them for a moment. Zariah absorbed it. You think he was approached, she said. I think someone needed a way into your records, and Patrick Osei's financial situation made him a possibility. Diane's voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of someone following a line to where it ended. I'm not saying he understood the full scope of what he was helping build. People usually don't. Zariah thought about Patrick at his desk, the way he'd been slightly too careful to look at her directly for the past few weeks, the way he straightened things on his desk when she walked past, the minor physical displacement of someone managing guilt. If he was pressured, she started. He's still a witness, Diane said, potentially the most important one. But we need to know what he knows before anyone else gets to him. We can't approach him directly. No, not us. Diane tapped her pen against the legal pad twice. What about Valenti's people? Zariah looked at her. Diane's expression was steady. She had been Zariah's lawyer long enough to know the whole story, and she was not a person who pretended complications didn't exist in order to make herself feel better about them. He said he was going to look, Zariah said. Let me be clearer. What I mean is, can his people find the technical evidence? The real access logs. Whoever actually entered those records, if it wasn't you, left a footprint somewhere. Systems always do. But that kind of footprint requires someone who knows where hospitals keep their backup data and how to read it. I told him not to move without me. I know, I'm not suggesting he move. I'm asking whether he has the capacity. Zariah was quiet. Yes, she said. He has the capacity. Diane wrote something on the pad, turned it around and slid it across the table. She had written one word. Timeline. They filed today, Diane said. The medical board's preliminary review takes between 10 and 21 business days. If this goes to a formal hearing, you have 60 days from notification to respond with evidence. That sounds like a lot of time. She paused. It is not a lot of time. I know. Zariah. If this goes to hearing and we don't have something concrete that undermines their documentation, she stopped. The board doesn't have to prove you did it beyond reasonable doubt. They just have to find the preponderance of evidence concerning enough to act. The word concerning dropped into the room, the way certain words do, carrying weight that the word itself didn't look like it contained. They can revoke my license on a preponderance standard, Zariah said. Not a question. They can suspend pending further review on a standard that's even lower than that, Diane said. And in this political climate, with an organized crime association in the press narrative, there is no association. I know that. You know that. The board is going to see a photograph and a formal complaint and documentation and a name that makes people nervous. Diane pulled the legal pad back and wrote something else. We need the real story before they finish building the fake one. She called Damien at 9:15 that night. He answered on the second ring, which told her he'd been waiting. My lawyer needs to know the scope of what your people can access, she said. No preamble. Specifically hospital data systems, backup servers, any access logs that the hospital's own IT might have missed or overwritten. All right. And financial records, specifically any transactions between a hospital employee, possibly in the records department, and an outside party over the last 4 to 6 months. A brief silence. You've identified someone. Possibly. I need it confirmed before I go anywhere near it officially. I can have something preliminary within 48 hours. Don't touch anything. Look only. If your people leave any trace, they won't. She believed him. She didn't fully understand why she believed him, except that in her experience, the people who said they won't about things like this with that particular quietness were people who had tested the claim enough times to be certain. There's something else, he said. She waited. There's been an inquiry, he said, federal, involving my name. His voice was careful. It was opened 6 weeks ago. I'm telling you because the timing matters, and because someone may have used the existence of it, to give the hospital's board more reason to take the complaint seriously. Zariah sat down on her couch. 6 weeks ago, she said. Yes. She did the math. That's before the gala. Yes. Someone knew about the inquiry before it became public. Or someone helped create the conditions for the inquiry, he said. to make a connection between us look worse than it is. She put her hand over her eyes. The apartment was quiet around her. The city noise outside had the peculiar muffled quality of a cold October night, and the ceiling light she hadn't dimmed was too bright for how she felt. "Damien," she said his name carefully. "Is there something you haven't told me about the federal situation? Nothing that changes what happened between us?" "That's not what I asked." A pause, longer than the others. "No," he said. "There is nothing I haven't told you that changes what is true between us." She let the distinction sit. She was a person who noticed distinctions. "Okay," she said. She hung up. She didn't sleep. Again. She was beginning to think sleep was something that belonged to a version of her life she'd temporarily vacated. The 48 hours passed the way difficult hours pass. Too fast in the moments she wasn't paying attention, and too slow in the moments she was. She went to Diane's office. She did not go to the hospital. She answered 3 patient calls that were routed through her personal line by people who didn't know yet or didn't care that she was suspended, and she had the same conversation 3 times. "I can't see you right now. Please contact Mercy General and ask to be reassigned. I'm sorry." Each time she said sorry, it cost her something. On the second morning, at 11 a.m., Diane called. "Something's happened," Diane said. The way she said it, the specific flat quality of those 2 words, told Zariah to sit down before she responded. She sat down. "What?" "Patrick Osei came in to see me this morning, voluntarily. He asked for his own legal counsel first, which tells me someone advised him to come forward." Diane's voice was controlled. "Zariah, he talked." The room felt suddenly very bright and very still. "What did he say?" "He was approached 4 months ago, not by Selena directly, through an intermediary, a woman he didn't know. Cash arrangement paid through a staffing agency as consulting work, so it looked clean on paper. He was asked to do 2 things. Diane paused. "First, to provide access credentials for your records login on 3 specific dates. Second, to log into the system under your credentials and add specific information to 2 patient files." Zariah's hand tightened around the phone. "He didn't know what he was adding," Diane said. "He was given the exact text and told it was a quality review correction, that it was above his pay grade to understand why, and that it needed to look like it came from you." He believed that. He was scared and he needed the money, and people believe what makes things easier to believe. Diane's voice wasn't harsh about it. "He says he didn't know what was being built until the complaint was filed. When he saw it in the internal memo, your name, the allegations, he put it together." "Can he testify to this?" "He's willing to, with conditions. But Zariah," another pause. This one had a different quality. "There's a second part." Zariah waited. "The intermediary, the woman who approached him. He gave me a description and a detail." Diane's voice was choosing its words with care. "She gave him a phone number. He kept it. I had it traced this morning through a contact. And it's registered to a shell company, which is registered to another shell company." Diane stopped. "The original registration traces back to a law firm that has represented, among other clients, a company with documented ties to the Valenti family's financial holdings." The sentence landed. Zariah heard it, all of it, every word. She did not move. "Diane," she said. Her voice came out very quiet. "Say that again." Diane said it again. Zariah stood up. She walked to her window. She looked at the city below. The streets, the cars, the people moving through October cold with their coats pulled around them, their ordinary lives proceeding in all directions. "That doesn't mean he did it," she said. Her voice was flat. "Shell companies have multiple clients. A law firm can represent—" "I know," Diane said. "I know. And I'm not telling you it's definitive. I'm telling you it's what we have, and it's what the other side will have too, if they're as thorough as they've been so far." She stopped. "Zariah, you need to consider the possibility that someone in his organization—" "He told me he was going to look," Zariah said. He told me he wouldn't move without me. He may have told you the truth, or someone else may have moved without his knowledge, to protect him, or to build something he didn't authorize. Organizations like his don't have people who act on what they think the boss wants without being told explicitly. Diane, don't. Silence. Zoraya pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. Outside, a bus moved through the intersection below her. A woman with a stroller waited at the light. Someone walked a dog with a bright red collar. Everything normal. Everything proceeding exactly as it always had. I need an hour, she said. Take what you need. But Zoraya, if this connection becomes part of the official record, if the board sees it, I know what it means. She hung up. She stood at the window for a long time, not thinking exactly. The mind does a particular thing in moments of genuine shock. It doesn't race, it goes very quiet, as if the system is buffering, rerouting, trying to find a path that still makes sense on the new map. She picked up her phone. She called his number. He answered in one ring this time. We need to meet, she said. Tell me where. Not somewhere visible. She thought. Your mother's room, at the rehabilitation center. She stopped. If she'll allow it. A very brief pause. She'll allow it. When? This afternoon. I'll be there. She hung up. She got her coat. She did not cry. She had not cried in so long she had begun to wonder if she still could, and she did not investigate the question now. Elena Valenti's rehabilitation suite was on the 3rd floor of the Harborview Recovery Center, and it was nicer than most apartments Zoraya had lived in during her residency. Not ostentatiously so. The furniture was good, but not showy. The light was warm. There were actual plants on the windowsill that appeared to be actually alive, which took effort. Elena herself was in an armchair near the window when Zoraya arrived, and she looked precisely the way a woman looks when she has recently won a fight with her own mortality and fully intends to collect on it. She was smaller than Zoraya remembered from the hospital. She was also sharper. Her eyes were the kind of dark that retained everything they looked at. Sit down, Elena said. You look terrible. Thank you, Zoraya said. That wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. Elena gestured at the chair across from her. Sit. My son is coming. You can fight in front of me. I don't mind. Zoraya sat. She and Elena were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a small courtyard garden had gone brown at the edges with the season. A sparrow sat on a branch doing nothing in particular. You saved my life, Elena said. Not warmly, not coldly, as a fact. Yes. My son is in love with you. Zoraya looked at her. I'm not telling you what to do about it, Elena said. I'm 63 years old and I have no interest in telling people what to do with their love. I'm telling you because you look like a woman who is about to say something very hard to him, and I want you to know what you're saying it to. Zoraya opened her mouth. Don't explain yourself to me, Elena said. I'm not your audience. The door opened. Damien came in without knocking, which told Zoraya this was his habit and not his urgency. He was in a dark coat, the same quality of clothes as the Gala, but without the formality. He looked at his mother, who gave him a look that communicated several things without any of them being said aloud. Then he looked at Zoraya. He knew. She could see that he knew something was wrong before she said anything. His face did not change. He had the kind of face that had learned not to change, but something behind his eyes settled into a different arrangement. He sat down. A phone number was traced, Zoraya said. She did not ease into it. She had decided on the drive over that she was not going to ease into it, because easing into it was a form of softening, and softening was a form of dishonesty, and she was done with dishonesty from every direction. The intermediary who approached the records clerk, they used a number registered to a company that connects back to a law firm with documented ties to your financial operations. The room was very still. Damien looked at her. That's not something I authorized, he said. I know. She held his gaze. I believe you. I want you to know that I believe you, and I want you to know that it doesn't matter. His jaw shifted. What do you mean it doesn't matter? It means that whether you authorized it or someone in your organization did it without explicit instruction, the connection exists in the record. And if the medical board finds that connection, which they will if they're doing their job, she stopped. It confirms every piece of the narrative that Selena Vaughn has been building. A compromised doctor, falsified records, financial entanglement with organized crime. She paused. That is the story. And right now, with the evidence as it exists, that story is more coherent than the true one. Damien stood up. He didn't go anywhere. He just stood. He turned to the window. Elena Valenti watched her son with an expression that contained, Zoraya thought, about 40 years of watching him carry things he wouldn't put down. Someone in my organization, Damien said, decided to help without being asked. Yes. And in helping, they built the thing they were trying to destroy. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. When he turned back around, his face had gone through something and come out the other side. Who? He said. Not to Zoraya, to the room. That's not my problem to solve, Zoraya said. My problem is that I have a medical board investigation, a suspended license, falsified records in the system, and now a paper trail that connects me financially to your organization. However it got there. I'll find who did it. Damien. She said his name the way she said things that needed to stop. I need you to listen to me. Finding who did it inside your organization. That's separate from what I need. What I need is evidence that undoes what's in the hospital system. Real access logs. Real financial records showing where those payments to Patrick Ose actually originated. Not from your people, not through your lawyers. She stood up. Through proper channels. Channels that don't give the board one more reason to look at me and see what they're already predisposed to see. You're telling me to stay out of it. I'm telling you that the way you help right now makes things worse. Her voice didn't waver. That is the truth, and I need you to hear it. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see the cost of what she was saying register in him. The particular frustration of a man whose entire operational language was the application of force and resources to problems, being told that both were contraindicated. Then what do you need? He said quietly. I need to know who inside your organization moved without your authorization. I need to know exactly what they did and exactly what they touched, not so I can report it. She met his eyes. So I know what I'm dealing with. So I know the shape of the hole I have to fill with legitimate evidence. He held her gaze. 24 hours, he said. I don't have 24 hours to wait. You have 48 before the board's preliminary review makes any of this moot, he said. 24. She looked at him. Then she looked at Elena, who was watching both of them with the expression of someone watching a game she already knows the outcome of and has decided not to spoil. 24, Zoraya said. She picked up her coat. She was at the door when Elena said quietly, Doctor. Zoraya stopped. You still saved my life, Elena said. Whatever else is true. You did that. Zoraya held the door handle. I know, she said. And she left. The drive back was 40 minutes in traffic. She spent it thinking about the shape of the thing she was inside. Not the details. The shape. The architecture of it. Because Selena Vaughn was smart, and Zoraya had to give her that. Had to look at what had been built and acknowledge the craft of it, the patience of it, the way it had been assembled piece by piece over weeks in a way that was nearly invisible until it wasn't. That was not an amateur's work. That was the work of someone who had thought about this for a long time, possibly before the Gala, possibly before Zoraya ever knew to worry. What Zoraya had not yet understood was the full scope of the resources behind it. She found out at 7 that evening. She was in Diane's office when Diane's contact at the county records office called back with the full corporate trail on the shell company. They stayed on speakerphone for 12 minutes, Zoraya and Diane both silent and taking notes, while the contact walked through the ownership chain. 3 shell companies deep, the trail split. One branch went to the law firm with Valenti ties. The other branch, the one Zoraya had not asked about because she hadn't known to ask about it, went somewhere else entirely. Went to a holding company, which was registered to a real estate development firm, which was the development firm that Selena Vaughn's father-in-law had been a principal in until his death 4 years ago. at which point his share had transferred to his estate, which was managed by his son, Selena's husband. Zoraya put her pen down. She looked at Diane. Diane looked back at her. She didn't just use Patrick Osei, Zoraya said. No, Diane said. She used money from her husband's inheritance. From the estate holding company. Yes. Diane's voice was careful, which means she had access to funds that could be moved through the shell structure without appearing directly connected to her. And she deliberately routed one thread toward Valenti's financial world. To make it look like the payment came from his side, yes. Diane closed her notepad. Zoraya, this wasn't impulsive. This isn't jealousy that got out of hand. This is someone who decided to destroy me, Zoraya said, and built the tool to do it over months. The room was very quiet. She framed me, Zoraya said. The words came out flat and exact like a diagnosis, and she threaded Damien's name into it deliberately, knowing that the connection would make it impossible for the board to look past. She paused. She planned this from the beginning, before the gala, maybe long before the gala. Diane said nothing. Zoraya stood up. She walked to the window of Diane's office, which looked out onto a side street where the evening was going dark fast, the way evenings did in late October, as if the daylight had somewhere else to be. I need everything, Zoraya said. The full corporate trail, Patrick Osei's statement, the access logs from Damien's people when he gets them to me. We'll need to find a legal way to introduce that information, an anonymous tip to an investigative body, something that triggers a legitimate inquiry. That's possible, Diane said, and I need to know if there are other employees she approached. If Patrick wasn't the only one, there may be others who haven't come forward. She turned around, and I need all of this before the board's preliminary review concludes. That's 17 days, Diane said. I know. It's not a lot of time. I know that too. Diane looked at her. Then she picked up her pen. All right, she said. Let's start. They worked until midnight. When Zoraya left the office, the street outside was empty and cold, and her breath made small clouds in the dark air. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She had spent 12 years building something, a career, a reputation, a version of herself that could walk into rooms that didn't want her and make them need her anyway. She had done it quietly, without allies, without anyone she had to thank at the end of every day. And in the space of 3 weeks, someone who had never saved a single life the way Zoraya had saved Elena Valenti's life had nearly taken all of it. Not nearly. It was still in progress. The thing that lived under the fear, the thing she'd found in the parking garage 2 days ago, the thing she kept finding every time she reached the bottom of what she thought she could handle, was not despair. It had never been despair. It was something harder and less comfortable than despair. It was the part of her that had walked into impossible situations for 12 years and refused, at the cellular level, to be the thing that stopped. She started walking toward her car. She had 17 days, a suspended license, a corrupted record, and a conspiracy that had been built by someone with time, money, and the specific cruelty of a person who believed that other people's suffering was acceptable collateral for their own advancement. What she also had was the truth. She had always found that the truth, given enough time and enough light, was a more durable thing than the structures people built to. She had 17 days. She used all of them. The first 3 were documentation. Zoraya and Diane worked through the corporate trail methodically, building a map of the shell company structure on a whiteboard in Diane's conference room. 3 whiteboards, eventually, pushed together end to end because the map kept growing. Every company name, every registration date, every principal listed, every connection between one entity and the next. They printed everything and put it in physical folders because Zoraya had decided early that she did not trust digital storage for anything she couldn't afford to lose, and Diane had agreed without needing the reasoning explained. Patrick Osei gave his formal statement on day 4. He came to Diane's office in the morning wearing a shirt that was slightly too large for him and the expression of a man who had not slept since he made the decision to come forward. He sat across from Diane and a court reporter Diane had brought in, and he talked for 2 hours and 20 minutes, starting from the beginning, the woman who had first approached him. The amounts. The dates. The exact text he had been given to enter into the 2 patient files, Text he had memorized because, he said, he had read it so many times trying to understand what it meant that it had embedded itself in him, whether he wanted it to or not. Zoraya sat in the corner of the room during the statement. She had asked Diane if she could be present, and Diane had said yes, but had told her to stay silent, which she did. She sat in a chair against the wall with a legal pad on her knee and wrote nothing. She just listened. She watched Patrick's hands, which moved constantly, adjusting his collar, smoothing the table edge, interlacing his fingers and unlacing them again. The hands of someone whose body understood what his words were admitting, even if his mind was still several steps behind. When he finished, she stood up and walked to him. He looked up at her with the specific torment of someone who expects to be hated and has decided to accept it. She said, "Thank you." He blinked. "I know what it cost to come here," she said. "I know it wasn't simple." He looked at the table. "I didn't know what I was helping do. I need you to know that." "I know," she said. And she meant it. Not because it absolved him. It didn't, fully, and they both understood that. But because it was true, and she was not in the business of denying things that were true. She left him with Diane and went back to work. On day 6, Damien called. "I have a name," he said. No preamble. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, something clipped and controlled that was the auditory equivalent of a locked door. "Who?" she said. "A man named Teo. He's been with my organization for 11 years. He handles—" A pause. "He handles certain kinds of financial movement. He acted without instruction. He believed he was protecting me." Another pause. "He believed the connection he built would never be traced back to our side in a way that mattered." "He was wrong." "He was wrong," Damien said. The two words had a weight to them that she didn't ask about. "He provided me with a full account of what he accessed and how. The exact servers, the exact timestamps, every action he took. Can you get that information to me in a format that could be used to trigger an independent investigation? Something that looks like it came from a standard cybersecurity audit flag, not from your people." A brief silence. "Yes. And it needs to be clean. If anyone traces the tip back to your organization, it won't trace back to us," he said. "I'll route it through a legitimate cybersecurity firm. They'll run a real audit. They won't know what they're looking for, but once they look, they'll find it." "How long?" "I can have it initiated within 24 hours. The firm will take 3 to 5 days to produce findings." Zoraya did the math. 11 days left before the board review concluded. 3 to 5 days for the audit. She needed the audit results to reach the board before they finalized their preliminary finding. "Do it," she said. "Zoraya." She waited. "Teo," he said, "I want you to know that I handled it." "I don't need to know how you handled it," she said. "I know. I'm telling you anyway." His voice was very quiet. "There are things I am. Things I'm not going to pretend I'm not. Especially not to you. But I don't put people in the path of harm for the sake of my own convenience. I want you to know that." She stood in Diane's conference room surrounded by 3 whiteboards of evidence and said nothing for a moment. "I believe you," she said. She hung up. Day 9, the cybersecurity firm's preliminary findings hit the hospital's IT department as a flagged security alert, standard protocol when an outside firm conducting a vendor compliance review discovered anomalous access patterns on hospital systems. The flag triggered an internal review by the hospital's own IT security team, which was exactly what it was designed to do. Zoraya heard about it through Diane, who heard about it through a contact in the hospital's legal department. "They found the access logs," Diane said, on the phone, and her voice had something in it that was not quite excitement, but was adjacent to it. The particular energy of a lawyer who has watched evidence fall into place. "The anomalous logins under your credentials, timestamps that don't match your documented physical presence in the building. IP addresses that route back to a terminal in the records department." "Patrick's terminal," Zoraya said. "Patrick's terminal. And there's more." Diane's breath was measured, but she was moving fast. The IT team found a second set of access logs on a backup server that had been marked for routine deletion but hadn't been overwritten yet. These logs show the original data in those 2 patient files, The version before the additions were made. Time stamped before Patrick's logins. So there's a before and after. There is a clean, unaltered before, and there is a modified after. And in between those two timestamps is a login that didn't come from you. Zariah sat down on the edge of Diane's conference table. That's the case, she said. Not a question, the way she said things when she had confirmed a diagnosis. That's the core of it, Diane said, but we need one more thing. We need the financial thread, the shell companies, to be independently confirmed as separate from Valenti. Right now we have the corporate trail that connects the payment to Selena's family money. What we don't have is someone official who has reviewed it and said so on record. The board won't, not the board. A forensic accounting firm. If we can get a forensic accounting analysis of the shell company structure submitted to the board as part of our formal response, it establishes that the financial origin of the payment to OSE was not, in fact, connected to Valenti's organization. That the Valenti connection in the shell company chain was a deliberate construction, not an actual financial relationship. How fast can we get that? I've already been in contact with a firm. They need the documentation we have and 5 working days. Zariah looked at the whiteboard. 6 days left. Tell them 4, she said. Diane told them 4. Day 13. 4 days left. The forensic accounting analysis came in at 9 in the morning, and it was 67 pages long, and by the time Zariah had read it twice, the back of her neck hurt, and she had filled another legal pad with notes, and Diane had made coffee that neither of them had touched. The analysis was clear. The shell company chain connecting the payment to Patrick Osei did pass through entities with historical Valenti financial associations, but the actual transaction origin, traced through wire transfer records, subsidiary banking relationships, and original capitalization documents, led back to the estate holding company that was the inheritance vehicle for Selena Vaughn's husband. The Valenti connection in the chain was architectural. It had been built in deliberately, using publicly available information about Valenti-associated entities to create a false through line. The money had never actually moved through anything connected to Damien Valenti. It had been made to look like it had. She built a ghost, Zariah said. A very convincing ghost, Diane said. She used publicly available financial structures, entities that were already known to be connected to his name, and constructed a paper chain that would make investigators assume the money came from that direction. Zariah looked at the analysis. Without a forensic accountant actually following the capitalization trail, you'd never know the difference. Which is why no one caught it initially, Diane said. The board's investigators saw the Valenti name in the chain and stopped looking. That's what she was counting on. Zariah stood up. Her lower back ached. She'd been sitting in conference room chairs for 13 days, and her body was beginning to register its objections in increasingly specific ways. We submit everything to the board today, she said. The IT findings, Patrick's statement, the accounting analysis, the full corporate trail. I've already drafted the formal response, Diane said. 214 pages. I need you to review and sign. Zariah reviewed it for 6 hours. She found 4 things she wanted changed, not errors precisely, but language that she felt didn't fully convey the specific sequence of events, and she rewrote those sections herself in the margins of Diane's printout, in the tight, clear handwriting she used when she was writing notes during surgery. Diane incorporated every change without argument. They submitted the response at 4:47 in the afternoon. The board meeting was scheduled for day 17, a Monday morning. 8 a.m. Zariah wore the same burgundy dress she'd worn to the gala. She did not examine that choice too closely. She made it, and she stood in her bathroom looking at herself in the mirror for approximately 30 seconds, and then she put on her coat and went downstairs. Diane met her in the lobby of the Harborview Medical Building, where the board conducted its formal review sessions. Diane was wearing a dark blue suit and carrying the full briefcase, and had the expression of someone who had done everything that could be done and was now prepared to sit in a room and watch it either work or not work. How are you? Diane said. Ready, Zariah said. They went in. The review board consisted of 7 physicians and 2 administrative representatives seated at a long table in a room that was slightly too cold and lit with the particular institutional fluorescence that made everyone look like they hadn't slept. The board chair was a woman named Dr. Constance Meyer, who was 67 and had the demeanor of someone who had been making difficult decisions for so long that difficulty itself no longer disturbed her. Selina Vaughn was there. Zariah had known she would be. The complainant had the right to attend the preliminary review. She was seated at a separate table to the left, beside a lawyer Zariah didn't recognize, wearing a pale gray suit that probably cost $4,000 and the carefully calibrated expression of someone who believes they are about to win. Zariah looked at her once, across the room. Selina met her gaze. Neither of them looked away for a moment. Then Zariah sat down. Dr. Meyer called the session to order at 8:04. She summarized the complaint. She summarized the board's preliminary findings from their initial review of the evidence presented in the complaint. She noted that a formal response had been submitted by the respondent and that the board had reviewed it in advance of this session. She noted that new evidence had been flagged by the hospital's IT security review, which had been independently initiated by a vendor compliance audit. Selina's lawyer shifted in his chair. Dr. Meyer laid out the process. Each side would present, the board would ask questions, the board would deliberate. Selina's lawyer went first. He was good. Zariah watched him work and acknowledged it internally without pleasure. He presented the original complaint evidence, the modified patient files, the billing record, the access logs that seemed to show Zariah's credentials active at unusual times, and the shell company connection to Valenti, with the measured confidence of someone who believes his foundation is solid. He was careful. He framed everything as a pattern of professional compromise, returning to that word, pattern, 6 times in 20 minutes. Dr. Meyer listened without expression. Then Diane stood up, and Zariah watched 12 years of surgical precision find its equivalent in a legal argument. Diane did not perform. She did not raise her voice. She presented the IT security findings first, the backup server logs, the original unmodified patient files, the anomalous login timestamps, the IP address routing to Patrick Osei's specific terminal in the records department. She presented them sequentially, with documentation for every claim, and she spoke at the pace of someone who is not worried about running out of time because she has more than enough material and knows exactly where it leads. Selina's lawyer objected twice. Both objections were noted, and both were insufficient to derail anything. Then Diane presented Patrick's statement. The room shifted. Not dramatically, not with visible reaction. But Zariah had spent 12 years reading rooms. It was a clinical skill, knowing when a room changed, and she felt it. The quality of the board members' attention changed. One of them, a cardiologist named Dr. Rashid, who Zariah knew slightly from conference proceedings, leaned forward with both forearms on the table. Diane presented the forensic accounting analysis last. She walked through the shell company chain with the 67-page analysis as her reference, explaining each corporate link, identifying the point at which the Valenti-associated entities appeared in the chain, and then demonstrating, document by document, capitalization record by capitalization record, that no actual money had flowed through those entities, that the connection was structural, not financial, that it was the kind of construction a person would build if they wanted investigators to stop looking when they reached a particular name. She named the estate holding company. She named the principal. She said Selina Vaughn's husband's name in the same level, measured tone she'd used for every other word. Selina's lawyer was on his feet. Objection, so this is speculative. The forensic accounting analysis is attached as Exhibit 31, Diane said, without looking at him. Pages 42 through 58 detail the capitalization trail. It's not speculation. Dr. Meyer said, Counselor, sit down. He sat down. Selina's face. Zariah watched it from across the room. She had been watching it peripherally the entire time, not staring, not giving it more attention than it warranted, but watching the way she watched vital signs during surgery, not looking for the dramatic collapse, looking for the early signals. The signals had started when Diane presented Patrick's statement, a very small tightening around Selina's jaw, a micro-adjustment of her posture, the kind that happened when a body registered threat before the mind had fully processed the information. When Diane named the estate holding company, Selina's left hand, which had been resting flat on the table in front of her, moved to her lap. When the lawyer sat down, Selina looked at him. He didn't look back. That was the moment. Not the moment the room changed, the moment Selena understood the room had changed. Dr. Meyer called a 15-minute recess. In the hallway, Zariah stood beside Diane and drank half a cup of terrible coffee from a vending machine down the corridor, and neither of them said anything for the first 2 minutes because there was nothing useful to say yet, and they both knew it. Then Diane said quietly, "The accounting analysis is the load-bearing piece." "I know. If the board accepts it as credible, they'll have to," Zariah said. "They can't look at those pages and call it speculative. It's a paper trail with source documents. They can decide to require additional time for their own independent verification." "How long would that take?" "Weeks, possibly months. Zariah crushed the coffee cup slightly in her hand. "Meyer won't do that." "You don't know that." "I know Constance Meyer's professional record," Zariah said. "She has spent 20 years on disciplinary boards. She did not get to that chair by avoiding decisions. She deliberates and she acts." She dropped the crushed cup in a trash can beside the vending machine. "She'll act today." Diane looked at her. "You're very certain." "I'm a surgeon," Zariah said. "I read what I can read and I make a call. That's all any of this ever is." They went back in. The board reconvened. Dr. Meyer spoke for 4 minutes, summarizing the new evidence and the board's options under procedural guidelines. Then she opened the floor to board questions. The questions took 40 minutes. They were pointed, specific, and progressively less directed at Zariah's side of the table. Dr. Rashid asked 3 questions about the accounting methodology, all of which Diane answered with page references. A physician named Dr. Okonkwo, who sat at the far end of the table and had said nothing until this moment, asked one question directed at Selena's lawyer. "Can you account for the discrepancy between the origin of the OSE payment and the financial entities named in the original complaint?" The lawyer said they would need time to review the new evidence. Dr. Okonkwo said, "That's not an account." Silence. Selena Vaughn turned to her lawyer and said something in a very low voice. He shook his head once. She said something else. Her voice was not audible from where Zariah sat, but the quality of the exchange, the specific body language of 2 people whose plan has just encountered something it was not built for, was completely readable. Dr. Meyer called an end to the questioning period. She said the board would deliberate. She said the parties would be notified of the board's determination within 2 hours. Everyone stood. The board filed out through the side door. Zariah and Diane gathered their materials. Selena and her lawyer gathered theirs. In the process of gathering, in the specific geometry of 2 groups of people moving around the same conference room table, Zariah and Selena ended up standing 3 feet from each other. It was not planned. It was the ordinary choreography of a room being vacated. Selena looked at her. Zariah looked back. Up close, without the performance of the gala or the strategic distance of the last several weeks, Selena's face was different than Zariah had seen it. The calibration was still there, the careful management of expression, but under it something had slipped. Something that looked, if Zariah was reading it correctly, less like the face of someone who had lost a battle and more like the face of someone who was only now understanding the size of what they had started. Zariah did not say anything. Selena opened her mouth, closed it, then said, very quietly, "You have no idea what you've done to my family." Zariah looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said. "You did that." She picked up her briefcase and followed Diane out of the room. The 2 hours were the longest 2 hours she could remember. They waited in a small anteroom down the hall. Zariah, Diane, and the particular quality of time that exists in moments where everything that can be done has been done, and now there is only waiting. Diane answered emails on her phone. Zariah sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the middle distance and thought about Gerald Fitch, the patient from 4 weeks ago, who had squeezed her hand before surgery and asked if she was as good as they said. She thought about Elena Valenti on that Tuesday night, watching her from a hospital bed with dark, exhausted eyes. Can you fix it? She thought about what it meant to be someone people brought their unfixable things to, and whether that designation survived what the last 17 days had tried to do to it. She thought it did. The knock at the anteroom door came at 11:22. They were being called back. She stood up. Her hands were completely still. She noticed this the way she always noticed it, not with pride, but with simple acknowledgement. Whatever else was true, the hands knew how to do their job. Dr. Meyer was already at the head of the table when they returned. The rest of the board was seated. Selina and her lawyer were at their table, and the lawyer's body language had the particular quality of someone waiting for a result he has already calculated. Selina was not looking at anyone. Her eyes were on the surface of the table in front of her. Dr. Meyer opened her folder. She put on her reading glasses. She looked at the room over the top of them for a moment. The specific practice pause of a person who has made decisions of consequence often enough to know that the moment before they're spoken deserves to exist. She said, "The board has reviewed the full evidentiary record as presented by both parties, in conjunction with the findings from the hospital's IT security audit and the forensic accounting analysis submitted as part of the formal response." The room was absolutely still. "We find," Dr. Meyer said, "that the evidence presented in the original complaint does not support the allegations of professional misconduct against Dr. Zariah Brooks. Furthermore, we find that the documentary evidence submitted in the formal response raises significant questions regarding the origin and integrity of the materials used to support the original complaint." Selina's lawyer made a sound. Not a word. A sound. "Accordingly," Dr. Meyer continued, "the board's preliminary suspension of Dr. Brooks's privileges is lifted effective immediately. The board further recommends that the hospital's Internal Affairs Office, in conjunction with the hospital's legal counsel, review the circumstances of the original complaint and the evidence of records manipulation identified in the IT audit." She took off her reading glasses. She looked directly at Zariah. "Dr. Brooks," she said, "the board regrets the disruption to your practice and to your patients. You are restored to full standing." Zariah's chest moved, a single breath in, a single breath out. She did not cry. She did not make a sound. She sat with it for exactly 3 seconds, the exact weight of 17 days pressing in and then releasing like a held surgical incision finally allowed to close. And then she said, "Thank you, Dr. Meyer," in a voice that was completely level, because that was who she was. Whatever they had tried to make her into, whatever this had tried to strip from her, that was still who she was. Diane put her hand on Zariah's arm for a moment, briefly. The contact of someone who understands that a person can hold a great deal and still need one moment to know they are not holding it alone. Across the room, Selina Vaughn sat with her eyes on the table and did not look up. Her lawyer was already leaning toward her, talking fast and low because, what, doctor? Meyer had just said about the Internal Affairs review meant that the next conversation Selina Vaughn was going to have with an attorney was not going to be about defending a complaint. It was going to be about something else entirely. Zariah stood. She buttoned her coat. She walked to the door. In the hallway, the institutional fluorescent lights hummed overhead exactly as they had when she'd arrived 2 hours earlier, and the corridor was exactly as cold, and somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and was answered, and the building went about its business the way buildings do, indifferent to the specific gravity of what has just happened inside any particular room. She walked toward the elevator. Diane came up beside her. "It's over," she said. Zariah pressed the elevator button. "No," she said. "The board part is over." Diane looked at her. "Selina built this with resources," Zariah said, "with planning, with someone's help. Patrick was approached by an intermediary. We know who that intermediary was working for, but we don't know yet if there was anyone else who participated." She watched the elevator numbers change. "Until there's a criminal proceeding, until someone sits in a room under oath and accounts for every piece of this, that's not your job," Diane said. "No," Zariah agreed, "but it matters." The elevator arrived. They stepped in. The doors closed behind them, and Zariah watched the floor numbers descend, and she thought about a woman who had spent 4 months building a case designed to end her career, and had done it with such precision that it had nearly worked, and she thought about the thing that had stopped it, not power, not money, not the kind of force that left marks. Evidence, truth, the particular durability of things that actually happened, set against the particular fragility of things that were constructed to look like they had. The lobby appeared below them as the elevator descended, and through the glass front doors of the Harborview Medical Building, she could see the November street outside. Colder than October had been, the trees gone fully bare, the sidewalk moving with people who had no idea what had just been settled in a conference room on the third floor. She stepped out of the elevator. She pushed through the front door. The cold hit her face, and she stopped on the front steps for a moment, and she stood there in her burgundy dress and her coat with the city in front of her, and she felt, for the first time in 17 days, the specific quality of air that reaches you when the weight has been set down and your lungs are allowed to fill properly. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. One message. No name. The number she had memorized without meaning to. I heard. Are you all right? She looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed back, I will be. She put the phone in her pocket. She went down the steps. Behind her, on the third floor of that building, in a conference room that was now being tidied by a building services employee who had not been present for any of it, a lawyer was explaining to Selena Vaughn the specific and serious nature of what the board's recommendation for internal review was going to mean for her, and Selena was sitting in a chair with both hands in her lap and the face of someone who had just understood, too late, that she had not been more powerful than the truth. She had only been faster. And the truth, as it turned out, had not been in any particular hurry. It had simply been waiting for 17 days and the right set of documents, and now it was out in the room, occupying all the space that the constructed version had held. And there was no rebuilding what had been dismantled in that particular way. Carefully, documented, before witnesses, in the presence of a board that had spent 20 years deciding what the facts were and what they... The criminal referral came 11 days after the board meeting. Zariah read about it on her phone at 6:15 in the morning, standing in her kitchen in socks and the gray long-sleeve shirt with the bleach stain, waiting for coffee to finish. The notification was from a legal alert service Diane had set up. Not a news article, not a gossip account, just a plain procedural filing notice from the county district attorney's office. Formal language. Case number. Charges listed in the flat, unglamorous vocabulary of criminal law. Bribery of a public institution employee, falsification of medical records, fraudulent manipulation of electronic data systems, and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. The name on the filing was Selena Diane Vaughn. Zariah read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the counter and poured her coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the November morning do what November mornings did. Gray sky, bare trees, a pigeon working at something on the fire escape of the building across the alley, with the focused intensity of a creature that has no interest in anything except the immediate problem in front of it. She drank her coffee. She did not feel what she had expected to feel when this moment came. She had thought, in the harder nights of the past weeks, that when Selena was formally charged, she would feel something definitive, relief, or satisfaction, or the specific emotional release of a pressure valve finally turned. She felt none of those things, exactly. What she felt was something quieter and harder to name, like finishing a very long surgery and stepping back from the table and knowing the patient would live, and also knowing that the living was the patient's work now, not hers. A completion that belonged to the process, not to her. She finished the coffee. She got dressed. She went to work. Her first morning back at Mercy General was not what anyone would call triumphant. The hospital had sent a formal letter of apology. 3 paragraphs, signed by the board chairman and the chief of medicine, with the specific careful language of an institution that has been advised by its legal team to acknowledge wrongdoing without creating additional liability. Zariah had read it once and filed it. Diane said to keep it. Zariah said she knew. What she had not anticipated was the particular quality of the hospital on her first morning back. She had expected it to feel different, smaller, maybe, or diminished in some way, the way places sometimes felt after you'd been through something that changed the scale of your own experience. It did not feel smaller. It felt exactly the same. The same fluorescent hum in the corridors, the same smell of antiseptic and institutional coffee, the same nurses' station with its specific organized chaos of charts and phones, and people moving with the focused efficiency of people who know what they are doing. Linda was at the front desk. She looked up when Zariah came in. She did not say welcome back. She did not do anything performative. She simply looked at Zariah directly for a moment, with her steady, unremarkable face, and then she said, "Room 218 has been asking for you. Mr. Fitch, He came in for his post-op follow-up yesterday and asked if you'd be back. Zoraya stopped at the desk. What did you tell him? She said. I told him I expected you would be, Linda said. Zoraya looked at her. Thank you, she said. Linda nodded, already looking back at her screen, already back to work. The unceremonious welcome of a person who had simply maintained her judgment of Zoraya throughout and saw no reason to make a production of being right. Zoraya went to see Gerald Fitch. He was sitting up in his post-op follow-up room in a hospital gown that was slightly too large for him, eating Jell-O with the resigned expression of a man who would prefer literally anything else. His border collie was not present, obviously, but there was a photograph on the side table. Hank on a back porch, tongue out, looking extremely pleased with existence. Gerald looked up when she came in. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Took you long enough? Zoraya pulled up the chair beside his bed and sat down. How are you feeling? Like someone reached into my chest and rearranged the furniture. He put the Jell-O down. They told me you were out for a while. I was. They didn't tell me why. No, she said. They wouldn't. He looked at her with the particular directness of a man who has recently survived a serious surgery and has consequently lost patience with indirection. You okay? Yes, she said. He studied her face for a moment. Apparently satisfied with what he found there, he picked up the Jell-O again. Good, he said, because I have opinions about my medication regimen and I need someone who actually knows what they're doing. Zoraya looked at his chart. She listened to his opinions. Some of them were reasonable. She was back. The full picture of what Selena had done came out in the weeks following the criminal referral, assembled piece by piece through the legal process the way all such pictures were assembled, slowly, imperfectly, with gaps that would probably never be fully filled. The intermediary who had approached Patrick Osei was identified as a woman named Carla Hutchins, who had done freelance research consulting for Selena through a third-party arrangement that Selena's lawyer had constructed specifically to maintain distance. Carla, faced with her own set of charges, provided a detailed account of her instructions, which had included not only the approach to Patrick, but the specific technical guidance about how to use his access credentials to enter the modified information, guidance that had come from a source Carla said she didn't know. That source was eventually identified through the phone records as a man with a background in medical IT who had worked for 3 hospital systems in the previous decade and had left each of them under circumstances that were, in the language of HR documentation, mutually agreed upon separations. He cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges and provided, among other things, the technical methodology he had used to access the backup server logs and make the modifications look like routine data entry. What emerged was a plan that Selena had begun developing not after the gala, as Zoraya had initially assumed, but 6 months before it. The gala had been the trigger for its acceleration, not its origin. She had started building the infrastructure, the intermediaries, the shell company routing, the technical consultant, while Zoraya was still operating without any knowledge of what was being constructed around her. Diane told her this in her office one afternoon, reading from the investigative summary, and Zoraya sat on the other side of the desk and listened without interrupting. When Diane finished, Zoraya said, 6 months. At least. Before the gala. Before the gala. Before the photograph. Before any of the public events. Diane set the summary down. She started building it while you were doing your job, while you were operating on patients, while you were living your life. Zoraya thought about that, about what it meant to be someone else's sustained project, to have been the object of that much sustained, detailed attention, none of it benevolent, all of it architectural, without knowing it. She thought about all the ordinary days of those 6 months, the surgeries, the consultations, the terrible gala coffee, and the long drives home, and the night she'd fallen asleep reading journals, all of it happening while someone else was building something designed to end her. Why? Zoraya said, not rhetorically. She wanted the factual answer. Diane was quiet for a moment. The preliminary investigation found documented communications going back 14 months, emails between Selena and a colleague. In them, she refers to you by name in the context of a research grant competition, a federal cardiology research grant. She believed you were the primary competition for a grant she'd applied for. The Miller-Hartley grant, Zoraya said immediately. You know it. I submitted for it 18 months ago. I was notified I didn't receive it about 8 months ago. She paused. I assumed I wasn't the strongest application. The grant committee's decision record, which the investigators subpoenaed, indicates you were the top-ranked application. The grant was ultimately awarded to a different institution due to a procedural reallocation. Diane looked at her steadily. You didn't lose it to Selena. She didn't win it. But the emails suggest she believed you were the reason she didn't receive it, that your reputation in the field had somehow influenced the committee's perception of her application by comparison. Zoraya sat with that. A research grant she hadn't won. A failure she had absorbed and moved past without catastrophizing, the way she absorbed most professional setbacks. With some frustration, with recalibration, with the forward motion that had characterized her entire career. Selena Vaughn had not moved past it. She spent 14 months, Zoraya said, building a criminal conspiracy to destroy my career over a grant neither of us received. That appears to be the case, Diane said. She said it without embellishment because it didn't need any. The facts were their own commentary. Zoraya looked at the window. Outside, the November afternoon was moving toward dark, the light going flat and thin the way it did this time of year. She had thought, before she knew all of it, that the scope of Selena's plan would make her angrier. Now that she knew, she found that the anger had mostly passed, had burned through its own fuel during the 17 days of the investigation, and left something behind that was neither peace nor bitterness, but something between them. Something more like clarity. What happens to her? She said. The DA is seeking 2 to 4 years on the primary charges plus restitution. Her medical license has been referred to the state board for separate disciplinary proceedings. Diane paused. Her husband filed for divorce last week. Zoraya didn't respond to that. She thought about Selena's face at the board meeting, the moment when the lawyer had stopped looking at her. The particular quality of that moment, not the face of a villain whose plan had been defeated exactly, more like the face of a person who had, in the process of building something to destroy someone else, also destroyed most of the architecture of their own life. There was nothing satisfying about it. Zoraya had expected there to be, and there wasn't. Thank you, she said to Diane, for everything. Diane looked at her over the desk. They had known each other for 22 years. Some of that time was in the accounting of this look, the kind of long-term knowledge of a person that meant you didn't need to say most of what you were saying. Don't thank me, Diane said. You built the case. I filed the documents. You were there every day. That's what you pay me for. Diane. A pause. You're welcome, Diane said. Now go back to your hospital. She went to see Elena Valenti on a Saturday in late November. Not because she had medical reason to. Elena's rehabilitation was complete. She had been discharged from Harborview Recovery Center 3 weeks after the board meeting and had returned to the apartment in the north part of the city where she had apparently lived for 40 years and had absolutely no intention of leaving. Zoraya knew this because Elena had called her from the apartment to tell her personally that she was home and that the physical therapist had been excellent and that the food had been tolerable except for the soup, which had been an insult. Zoraya had asked how she was feeling. Elena had said, alive, which is your fault. Zoraya had smiled for the first time in several days. The apartment was on the 6th floor of a building that had a small elevator and a lobby with black and white tile floors and a door buzzer that sounded like it had been installed in 1987 and never serviced. Elena buzzed her up without asking who it was through the intercom, which either meant she was expecting her or meant she buzzed everyone up without asking, and Zoraya suspected both things were equally true. The apartment was warm and filled with the smell of something that had been cooking for a long time. Books on every flat surface that wasn't furniture, a lamp with a slightly crooked shade, 2 plants on the windowsill that were doing better than most of Zoraya's plants had ever done, which she noted without comment. Elena was in the kitchen when Zoraya came in, standing at the stove, and she turned around and looked at Zoraya the same way she had looked at her in the rehabilitation suite, assessing, direct, unhurried. You look better than the last time, Elena said. You look better than the first time, Zoraya said. Elena's mouth moved in something that was either a smile or a near miss for one. Sit down. There's tea. They sat at the kitchen table and drank tea that was stronger than anything Zoraya usually drank, and ate small cookies that Elena had made herself, which were very good, and they talked the way two people talk when they have a large amount of history in common that doesn't have a conventional name. Elena asked about the case. Zoraya told her, without details she hadn't already decided to share, the broad shape of what had happened and where it stood. Elena listened with her teacup in both hands and her eyes steady. The woman who did this, Elena said when Zoraya finished, she's finished. Professionally, probably legally. Good, said simply, without relish. The verdict of someone who has seen enough of people to know when the reckoning is proportionate. It doesn't feel the way I thought it would, Zoraya said. Elena looked at her. What did you think it would feel like? I don't know. Cleaner. Elena set her cup down. She was quiet for a moment, turning the cup slightly on its saucer. When I was 34, she said, someone cheated my husband in a business deal, took a significant amount of money, and left us with a debt that took years to settle. She paused. Damien was 12. He watched his father work 7 days a week for 4 years to recover from it. She turned the cup again. The man who cheated him eventually lost everything. His business, his reputation, his wife. It collapsed on its own over time. She looked at Zoraya. When it happened, my husband said he felt nothing. He said he'd expected relief and gotten nothing. She picked the cup back up. He told me the problem was that he'd spent 4 years imagining the other man's downfall as the end of something. But the debt had already been paid. Every day of those 4 years, he had already paid it. By the time the other man fell, it was just an event, separate from the work. Zoraya looked at her teacup. The work was the thing, Elena said. Not the ending. Zoraya sat with that for a while. Outside the kitchen window, the city moved in the gray November afternoon. She could hear it faintly. Traffic, someone's radio somewhere below, the ordinary noise of an ordinary Saturday. Your son, Zoraya said. Elena waited. He's coming tonight, Zoraya said. It was not quite a question. He's been coming every Saturday since I came home, Elena said. He brings food that is too much for one person, and we argue about what to watch, and he falls asleep in the chair by 10. She said this with the tone of someone reporting facts that are also a form of love. Zoraya looked at the table. He told you, she said. He didn't tell me anything, Elena said. He didn't need to. Zoraya nodded slowly. He's not a simple man, Elena said. I don't tell you this as a warning. I tell you because you are not a simple woman, and you should know that he understands the difference. Zoraya looked up. Elena met her eyes. He has spent his whole life in rooms that wanted something from him. Fear, money, deference, cooperation. He does not know what to do with someone who wanted nothing, who did their job and asked for nothing and told him no and meant it. She paused. It broke something open in him. I watched it happen. Zoraya didn't say anything. He is also, Elena said, very annoying when he hasn't slept, so I feel you should have that information as well. Zoraya almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. I'll keep it in mind, she said. Damien arrived at 7. He had food, as advertised, containers from a Korean restaurant that Zoraya later learned he had been taking his mother to since she was well enough to leave the rehabilitation center. He came in without the men who usually accompanied him in public settings, which was a distinction Zoraya noted. Just himself, a coat, and 4 containers of food. He stopped when he saw Zoraya at the kitchen table. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Elena took the food containers from him with the efficiency of a woman reclaiming her own kitchen and began opening them without ceremony. Damien sat down across from Zoraya. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the first night in the ballroom, directly, without the social performance of looking, without the awareness of audience that colored most people's attention in most situations. Just looking. How are you? He said. Better? She said. The hospital. I went back Monday. She paused. It's the same. which is what I needed it to be. He nodded. Teo, she said. His jaw shifted slightly. He's no longer with my organization. Was he? He's fine, Damien said. He has a job with a logistics company in another city. He understood what he'd done. A pause. He didn't understand the technical consequences of what he'd built. He thought he was helping. That doesn't change what it cost. No, Zariah agreed. It doesn't. They were quiet for a moment. Elena moved around them in the kitchen with the complete lack of self-consciousness of a woman in her own space. I owe you an apology, Damien said. Zariah looked at him. The investigation, he said. The way I handled it initially. The approach to your records, through Teo, before I knew what it would cost. You didn't authorize it. It happened in my name, in my organization. His voice was flat. That's the same thing. Zariah looked at him for a long moment. I know you believe that, she said. I'm not going to argue with you about it. That's not agreement. No, she said. It's not. He accepted that with a small movement of his head. Not quite a nod, more like an acknowledgement that this was the territory they were in, and it didn't need to be resolved right now, to be honest. Elena set plates in front of both of them. Eat, she said. Then you can finish being sincere at each other. They ate. The food was very good. Zariah ate more than she had eaten at a single sitting in 3 weeks, which was not a high bar, but was still notable. Outside, the November dark had settled over the city completely, and the kitchen was warm and light in the particular way of rooms where someone has been taking care of things for a long time. At some point during the meal, Elena began talking about the physical therapist who had told her she shouldn't carry more than 10 pounds for another 6 weeks, and her precise and detailed objections to this recommendation. And Damien interjected twice with the tone of someone who has been having this argument for weeks and has not won it yet and does not expect to. And Zariah found herself listening to the two of them and feeling something unfold in her chest that was not dramatic and did not announce itself. Just warmth. The ordinary, unglamorous warmth of being in a room where she was expected. Later, when Elena had retreated to the living room with her tea and the television, Zariah and Damien stood at the kitchen window with the remains of dinner cleared away, looking at the city below. The apartment was high enough that you could see a stretch of it, lights, bridges, the dark line of the river in the distance. I kept the card, she said. He looked at her. The one you gave me at the gala. I moved it from my evening bag to my wallet, and I didn't throw it away. She looked at the city. I told myself it was practical, in case I needed to reach you for professional reasons. Was it practical? No, she said. He was quiet. I don't know what this is, she said. I want to be honest about that. I don't know what it's supposed to look like, or what it can be, given, she paused, given everything, the distance between our lives. The distance is real, he said. Yes. It doesn't shrink because I want it to. No, she agreed. It doesn't. He turned from the window to look at her. I'm not asking you to pretend the complications don't exist, he said. I'm not built for pretending, and I don't think you are either. I'm not. Then tell me what you need, he said. Not what's realistic, not what makes sense on paper, what you actually need. Zariah looked at the city. She had spent 12 years building the version of herself that didn't need, that had systematically reduced her requirements until what remained was clean and manageable and required nothing from anyone that could be withheld. It was an efficient way to live. It was also, if she was honest, and she was always honest eventually, given enough time and enough quiet, a very lonely way to live. I need to take this slowly, she said. All right. I need it to be not hidden, not something that lives in the dark. I don't hide things, he said. It's not in my nature. I know. She turned to look at him. I need you to understand that who I am in my work, that comes first. Not because you're second, because it's who I am. It was who I was before any of this, and it's what this whole situation was built to take away from me, and it didn't. And I won't put that second for anyone. He looked at her for a long moment. I know who you are, he said. I came to a hospital every day for 12 days so that the woman who was keeping my mother alive could do her job without my presence becoming a variable in how my mother was treated. He paused. I know what your work is. I watched it save the only person in the world I would trade anything for." Zariah held his gaze. "Okay," she said. The word was small. It carried more than it looked like it could carry. He reached out and touched her hand. Not a grasp, just contact, the back of his fingers against the back of hers, brief and unhurried, the gesture of someone who is not in a rush to take more than what is offered. She did not move her hand away. The last piece fell into place on a Tuesday in December. Zariah was between consultations, at her desk, when her email notification produced a message from the hospital's board chairman. Subject line: Public Statement. Reinstatement of Dr. Zariah Brooks. She opened it. It was not a private email. It was the text of a public statement that had been released to the hospital's communications channels that morning. She read it with the same careful attention she gave everything, looking for what was present and what was absent. What was present? A full account of the board's findings. An acknowledgement that the suspension had been based on fabricated evidence. A formal apology from the hospital for the failure of its processes to protect one of its physicians from a targeted campaign of professional sabotage. A statement that the hospital had reviewed its records management protocols and implemented additional security measures. A commitment to further review of internal processes. What was absent? The hedging language that institutions usually installed in these statements like load-bearing walls. The careful passive voice. The strategic vagueness. Someone, possibly Marcus Webb, possibly the chairman himself, possibly the hospital's legal counsel operating under the particular liability pressure of having suspended a physician on false evidence, had decided to be straightforward. Zariah read it twice. Then she called Marcus Webb. He answered on the third ring. "I saw the statement," she said. "I wanted you to see it before it went out," he said. "I should have called. I'm sorry I didn't call." She was quiet for a moment. "Marcus," she said, "the morning after the gala, when you showed me that photograph and told me to be careful." "I know," he said. His voice had the quality of someone who has been sitting with a specific regret. "You should have asked me what happened before you assumed anything." "I know. You've known me for 6 years." "I know, Zariah." His voice was heavy, not defensive, just carrying the weight of it without deflection, which was the most she could ask. "I failed you. The institution failed you. I'm not going to dress that up." She held the phone. "Okay," she said. The same word she'd said to Damien at the kitchen window. The same weight in it, different shape. "I'd like to, when you're ready, discuss the trial funding again," he said. "The cardiology research trial. I think we can find internal funding to move it forward." "Let's talk about it after the new year," she said. "Yes, of course." She hung up. She sat at her desk for a moment. She thought about the woman who had stood in a ballroom a little over 2 months ago in a burgundy dress, with a champagne glass she hadn't touched, and 5 words landing on her skin like something cold. She thought about how close it had all come. Not the reputation, not the career, but the thing underneath those things. The part of her that had built both and held both and refused to let them be taken. She had not changed. That was the thing. She had been tested with the specific intention of changing her, of making her into something smaller or angrier, or more willing to use the tools she'd been shown were available, and she had not changed. She was tired. She was more aware of her own capacity for loneliness than she had been 2 months ago. She was more aware of what it cost to spend 12 years being the person who showed up, always, without expectation of reciprocity. But she was the same. She picked up her pager. She clipped it to her coat. She had a consultation in 12 minutes. She went. The rooftop was Damien's idea. He told her he wanted to show her something, which was not the kind of thing he usually said. He was not, in the weeks she had been spending time with him, a person who trafficked in vague invitations. So she said yes with more curiosity than hesitation. It was a Thursday in December, cold and clear, the kind of cold that sharpened things rather than dulling them. The building was in the center of the city, one of his, she understood, without asking the details. And the rooftop was not a renovated deck or a designed space, but just a rooftop, flat and open, with the city sprawling out from it in every direction. She could see the river, the bridges, the hospital. She found it without trying, knew the shape of it from 20 angles. Damien stood beside her. They'd been up there for 5 minutes without talking, which was something she had come to appreciate about him. He understood silence the way people understood it who had spent a lot of time in rooms where silence was a tool. He didn't fill it. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Tell me." He looked at the city. He was quiet for a moment in the particular way of someone who has decided to say something true and is making sure they have the right words, not for polish, but for accuracy. "I have spent 20 years," he said, "in a world where every relationship is a transaction, where everyone who gets close to me wants something or fears something, and usually both. I built that world, and I know how it works, and for a long time I thought the knowing was enough." He stopped. "It isn't enough. I'm telling you that because I want you to know I'm not—" He paused. "I'm not a man who comes to this easily. I'm not someone who says things like this." "I know," she said. "I'm also not someone who is going to become uncomplicated," he said. "What I am, what my life is, that doesn't transform. I can't offer you simple." "I haven't had simple a single day of my life," she said. "I don't know what I'd do with it." He turned to look at her. The city lights were coming on below them as the evening settled in, the way they did. Gradually, and then all at once, the way most things in cities happened. Bridges lit, office towers, the long, slow curve of the river reflecting all of it back. "Walk beside me," he said. She looked at him. "Not as someone I protect," he said. "Not as someone I rescued. I want to be clear about that. You didn't need rescue. You never did." He held her gaze. "As the person who walked into a room I was sitting in and made me understand that there are people in this world who cannot be bought or frightened and who are more powerful for that than anyone I've ever employed." Zariah looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 12 years, about all the rooms that hadn't wanted her, and all the surgeries that had needed her, and the gap between those two things that she had lived inside for so long, it had begun to feel like the only available architecture. She thought about a Tuesday night at 11:47, and a woman in a hospital bed with dark, exhausted eyes, and the moment she had stood at the foot of that bed and made a calculation and committed to it without flinching. She thought about 5 words spoken in a ballroom and what had come after them, and whether any of it, the humiliation, the conspiracy, the 17 days, the hearing, all of it, had made her less than she was. It had not. She knew this now with the particular certainty of someone who has been tested for it specifically. She looked at the man standing beside her, complicated, unreformed, present. Not a hero, not a villain, a person with the specific weight of a real person's history who had crossed a ballroom once because something in him recognized something in her before either of them had words for it. "Okay," she said. "Not surrender, not rescue. Just a woman who had fought for her own life with everything she had, and won, and was now standing on a rooftop in December choosing what came next." She stood beside him. Below them, the city moved and breathed and continued in all directions at once, enormous and indifferent and full of lives proceeding without resolution, without clean endings, without the luxury of knowing how things turned out. And above it, 2 people who had found each other through the most unlikely architecture of chance and crisis and grief and stubbornness stood in the cold air with the lights coming up around them, and did not speak and did not need to. The truth had stood beside her through everything, and now, for the first time in longer than she could remember, so did someone else.